Captain Elena Vasquez had been dead for 7 years, at least according to every official record that mattered. The woman who now went by Maria Santos and ran a small fishing charter business on the remote island of Isla Perdida had buried that name so deep that sometimes she almost believed the lie herself. But lies have a way of surfacing when you least expect them, especially when 25 enemy warships decide to test the boundaries of what you thought was your peaceful retirement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered dock where Maria Santos tied off the mooring lines of her 36-foot sport fishing boat, the Isabella. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she claimed to be, a local charter captain who knew these waters better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. Her sun-darkened skin and calloused hands told the story of someone who made her living from the sea, hauling in mahi-mahi and marlin for tourists who paid good money to feel like deep-sea heroes for a day. Isla Perdida sat like a forgotten emerald in the vast blue expanse of the Caribbean, 40 miles from the nearest inhabited landmass and completely absent from most tourist maps. The island stretched barely 3 miles end to end, with a population that fluctuated between 67 and 73, depending on who was visiting relatives on the mainland, and whether old Henrik's emphysema had finally claimed him. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, except when it came to Maria Santos, who had arrived 7 years ago with enough cash to buy the marina outright, and a story about inheriting money from a deceased aunt in Venezuela that no one quite believed but also didn't question too hard. Maria's daily routine had the precision of a Swiss timepiece, though she disguised it well beneath the laid-back demeanor expected of a Caribbean charter captain. Every morning at 5:15 she would walk the docks checking hull integrity, fuel levels, and weather conditions, with an attention to detail that would have impressed a naval inspector. She maintained her boat with the kind of meticulous care that spoke of someone who understood that mechanical failure at sea could mean the difference between life and death, though the tourists who hired her for half-day fishing excursions never noticed the military-grade GPS system hidden beneath the standard fish finder or the encrypted radio equipment disguised as a standard marine band transceiver. The locals had their theories, of course. They always did in small communities where new arrivals stood out like lighthouse beacons. Some whispered that she was running from a violent ex-husband, pointing to the way she never spoke about family or seemed to receive personal mail. Others suspected she was hiding from some kind of financial trouble, though her boat was always well-maintained, and she never seemed to struggle for money. Old Carlos, who ran the island's only cantina, swore she'd been some kind of drug smuggler who'd gotten out of the business before things went bad, citing the way she could read weather patterns and ocean currents like they were written in a language only she understood. What none of them suspected was that Maria Santos had once been Captain Elena Vasquez of the United States Navy, commander of the experimental stealth destroyer USS Phantom, and the only person to successfully pilot an untested naval vessel through enemy waters during a classified operation that officially never happened. The woman who now spent her days teaching wealthy Americans how to set trolling lines and spot diving birds had once commanded a crew of 120 sailors on missions that required presidential authorization and carried casualty estimates that kept Pentagon planners awake at night. Elena's transformation into Maria had been complete and deliberately unremarkable. She spoke English with just enough of an accent to reinforce her cover story, though anyone with a trained ear might have noticed that her pronunciation shifted subtly, depending on her mood, sliding between the musical cadences of coastal Venezuela and the crisp efficiency of someone educated in American military academies. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of practical clothing, weathered cargo shorts, faded fishing shirts, and boat shoes that had seen enough saltwater to tell stories of their own. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wore no makeup, and had developed the kind of deep tan that came from years of genuine outdoor work rather than vacation leisure. But it was in the small details that Elena's true nature occasionally surfaced for those who knew how to look. She moved through her daily tasks with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training, never wasting energy or taking unnecessary steps. When she worked on her boat's engine, her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had maintained far more complex machinery under much more challenging conditions. And sometimes, when storm clouds gathered on the horizon or Coast Guard cutters appeared in the distance, her posture would shift almost imperceptibly into something that looked suspiciously like military bearing. The marina where Maria kept the Isabella was a modest affair. 12 slips, a small fuel dock, and a cramped office that doubled as a tackle shop and tourist information center. She had purchased the entire operation from a retiring American expat who was eager to return to Florida before hurricane season made travel difficult. The transaction had been conducted entirely in cash, which raised some eyebrows but also eliminated the kind of paperwork trail that might attract unwanted attention from financial investigators or tax authorities. Maria's business model was deliberately simple and sustainable. She offered half-day and full-day fishing charters to tourists staying at the few small hotels on neighboring islands, corporate groups looking for team-building experiences, and the occasional serious angler willing to travel off the beaten path for the chance at landing trophy fish in relatively undisturbed waters. Her rates were competitive but not suspiciously low, her equipment was reliable but not ostentatiously expensive, and her customer service struck the perfect balance between professional competence and Caribbean laid-back charm. What her customers didn't know was that every charter trip served a dual purpose. While they focused on fighting fish and taking photos, Maria was constantly scanning the horizon, monitoring radio traffic, and updating mental maps of vessel movements throughout her operational area. She had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of every boat that regularly transited these waters, from commercial fishing vessels and cargo ships to private yachts and government patrol craft. Any deviation from normal patterns, any unexpected radio chatter, any vessel that appeared where it shouldn't be, Maria noticed and filed away for future reference. The island's communication systems were another area where Maria had quietly made improvements that went unnoticed by the casual observer. She had upgraded the marina's internet connection, ostensibly to provide better service for customers who wanted to share their fishing photos on social media, but actually to maintain encrypted data links that allowed her to monitor global shipping traffic, weather satellites, and military communication frequencies. Her office computer appeared to be running standard business software, but hidden partitions contained databases of naval vessel specifications, encrypted communication protocols, and tactical analysis programs that would have been familiar to anyone who had served in naval intelligence. The local authorities were minimal and largely ceremonial. Isla Perdida fell under the jurisdiction of a larger administrative district, but the nearest police station was a 2-hour boat ride away, and the resident government representative was a part-time postal clerk who spent most of his time playing dominoes with the retired fishermen. This suited Maria perfectly, as it meant that her activities went largely unobserved by anyone with official authority, or the inclination to ask uncomfortable questions about her background. Maria's living quarters were located in a small apartment above the marina office, spartanly furnished but comfortable enough for someone who had spent years living in cramped naval accommodations. The apartment's most notable feature was its excellent view of the surrounding waters, which allowed her to maintain visual surveillance of all approaches to the island without appearing to be doing anything more than enjoying the scenery. She had installed high-quality binoculars and a spotting scope that she claimed were for identifying distant fishing boats and checking weather conditions, though their actual specifications would have been more appropriate for military reconnaissance work. The few personal possessions that Maria allowed herself were carefully chosen to reinforce her cover identity while providing subtle reminders of her true capabilities. A collection of nautical charts covered one wall of her apartment, marked with notations about fishing spots and weather patterns, though a closer examination would have revealed depth soundings and current patterns plotted with the precision of someone planning naval operations. Her bookshelf contained the expected mix of fishing guides and Caribbean travel literature, but also included technical manuals on marine engineering and navigation texts that went far beyond what a simple charter captain would need. Maria's social life on the island was friendly but carefully limited. She was known as someone who could be counted on in emergencies. She had used her boat to evacuate sick residents to mainland hospitals during several medical crises and had helped coordinate rescue efforts when hurricanes threatened the island. But she maintained enough emotional distance to prevent the kind of close relationships that might lead to probing questions about her past or unexpected visitors who might recognize her from her previous life. The transformation from Elena to Maria had required more than just a change of name and occupation. Elena had spent months learning the rhythms of Caribbean life, studying local customs and speech patterns, and developing the practical skills that would make her charter business credible. She had practiced her Spanish until she could speak with the regional accent and colloquialisms that tourists expected, learned to read weather patterns from cloud formations and wave action, and developed genuine expertise in the fishing techniques that her customers paid to learn. But beneath the carefully constructed persona of Maria Santos, Elena Vasquez remained very much alive. Her morning runs along the island's perimeter were disguised as casual exercise, but actually served to maintain the physical conditioning required for naval operations. Her evening swims in the lagoon on the island's east side appeared recreational, but were actually training sessions designed to keep her underwater endurance and navigation skills sharp. And the fishing gear that filled her boat's storage compartments included items that would have been more familiar to naval special operations teams than to sport fishermen. The most challenging aspect of maintaining her cover had been learning to suppress the instincts and reactions that had been drilled into her during years of military training. Elena had to consciously remind herself to appear startled by unexpected noises, instead of immediately analyzing them for potential threats. She had to practice looking confused by technical discussions, instead of automatically understanding complex mechanical or navigational concepts. And she had to learn to appear impressed by the modest accomplishments of weekend sailors, instead of mentally critiquing their techniques based on professional naval standards. Maria's customer base had developed gradually through word-of-mouth recommendations and carefully placed advertisements in regional fishing magazines. She had cultivated relationships with hotel concierge and tour operators on neighboring islands, who could refer clients seeking a more authentic fishing experience away from the crowded tourist areas. Her reputation was built on consistent results. She knew where the fish were and how to catch them, combined with a professional demeanor that made even inexperienced anglers feel confident and safe on the water. The seasonal patterns of her business provided natural cover for the times when Elena needed to conduct more sensitive activities. During the quiet months when tourist traffic was light, she could use extended boat maintenance periods to travel to other islands for supply runs that actually involved maintaining contact with intelligence assets and monitoring potential threats to her security. The busy tourist season provided opportunities to observe and evaluate visitors who might pose risks, while the constant flow of charter customers made her movements appear routine and commercially motivated. Weather played a crucial role in Maria's operational planning, though her customers saw only her uncanny ability to find fish even when conditions seemed challenging. Elena's meteorological knowledge went far beyond what was necessary for sport fishing, encompassing the kind of detailed understanding of atmospheric and oceanic conditions that naval commanders needed for planning complex operations. She could predict the movement of storm systems days in advance, identify atmospheric conditions that would affect radar and radio propagation, and use weather patterns to mask activities that required concealment from satellite surveillance. The Isabella itself was Maria's most important asset and her most carefully guarded secret. To casual observers, it appeared to be a well-maintained but unremarkable sport fishing boat, equipped with the standard complement of fishing gear, navigation equipment, and safety devices required for commercial charter operations. But Elena had made numerous modifications that transformed the vessel into something far more capable than its appearance suggested. The boat's engines had been upgraded with military-spec components that provided both greater reliability and significantly improved performance when needed. The hull had been reinforced in key areas and equipped with self-sealing fuel tanks that could withstand impacts that would disable civilian vessels. The electrical system included redundant power supplies and shielded wiring that would continue functioning even under electromagnetic interference that would cripple standard marine electronics. Most importantly, the Isabella's communication and navigation systems were far more sophisticated than they appeared. Hidden beneath the standard fish finder and GPS display was a military-grade sonar system capable of detecting submerged objects at ranges that would have impressed submarine commanders. The radio equipment included encrypted communication capabilities that allowed Elena to maintain contact with intelligence networks while appearing to make routine calls to fuel docks and fishing supply companies. The boat's storage areas contained equipment that would have puzzled fishing enthusiasts but would have been immediately recognizable to naval special operations personnel. Waterproof containers held night vision equipment, underwater breathing apparatus, and other specialized gear that Elena hoped she would never need but maintained in constant readiness. The fishing rod holders could be quickly converted to support antennas for long-range communication equipment, and certain sections of the deck could be removed to reveal mounting points for equipment that definitely wasn't designed for catching fish. Elena's daily routine aboard the Isabella served multiple purposes beyond providing fishing charters. Every trip allowed her to update her knowledge of local water conditions, current patterns, and the positions of reefs and underwater obstacles that could affect navigation during emergency situations. She maintained detailed logs of all vessel traffic in the area, noting patterns that might indicate surveillance or reconnaissance activities by potentially hostile forces. The fishing charters themselves provided excellent cover for electronic intelligence gathering. While her customers focused on their lines and celebrated their catches, Elena was constantly monitoring radio frequencies used by military and intelligence services. The boat's sophisticated antenna array, disguised as standard fishing and navigation equipment, could intercept and analyze communications from vessels that passed within range, building a comprehensive picture of naval activities throughout the Caribbean region. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria's relationship with the other boat operators in the area was carefully managed to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence. She participated in the informal network of captains who shared information about fishing conditions and weather, but also listened carefully for any mentions of unusual vessel movements or activities that might indicate developing threats. Her reputation for reliability and local knowledge made other captains comfortable sharing information with her, often including details about boats and activities that they found unusual or concerning. The island's isolation, which most residents viewed as a disadvantage, was actually one of Elena's greatest assets. The limited number of regular visitors made it easy to identify potential threats, while the lack of government infrastructure meant that her activities were largely unmonitored by official authorities. The local population was small enough that she could maintain awareness of everyone's activities without appearing suspicious, but large enough to provide social camouflage for her presence. Elena had also developed relationships with pilots who flew cargo runs to the island, using her position at the marina to monitor air traffic while maintaining the appearance of simply coordinating fuel deliveries and passenger transfers. She had learned to identify aircraft types and flight patterns that might indicate surveillance or reconnaissance activities, and had established procedures for quickly communicating with external contacts if threats were detected. The financial structure of Maria's business was designed to support both her cover identity and her operational requirements. The charter business generated enough legitimate income to explain her standard of living while providing justification for the fuel consumption and equipment purchases that her actual activities required. She had established banking relationships that allowed for secure financial transactions while maintaining the appearance of a simple small business operation. But it was the psychological aspects of her transformation that had proven most challenging. Elena had been trained for command, accustomed to making decisions that affected the lives of hundreds of personnel and the success of missions worth billions of dollars. Learning to appear content with the simple pleasures of a charter fishing business required constant, conscious effort, suppressing the analytical mindset that had made her one of the Navy's most effective tactical commanders. The loneliness was perhaps the most difficult aspect of her new life. Elena had thrived on the camaraderie and shared purpose of naval service, the intense relationships forged through facing danger together and working toward common goals. As Maria, she was surrounded by friendly acquaintances, but had no one who truly knew her or understood the experiences that had shaped her. She had learned to find satisfaction in the simple accomplishments of her cover life: successful fishing trips, satisfied customers, mechanical problems solved. But these victories felt hollow compared to the complex challenges she had once faced. Sleep often brought dreams of her former life, memories of standing on the bridge of the USS Phantom as it cut through hostile waters, the quiet confidence of a crew that trusted her judgment completely, the satisfaction of missions accomplished against impossible odds. Elena would wake in her simple apartment above the marina, surrounded by the sounds of waves and seabirds, feeling the weight of 7 years of carefully maintained deception. But she had made her choice, and the reasons for that choice remained as valid as they had been 7 years ago. The operation that had ended her naval career had been classified beyond any normal level of secrecy, involving technologies and tactics that could never be acknowledged officially. The enemies she had faced during that final mission had long memories and global reach, making it impossible for Captain Elena Vasquez to continue existing in any official capacity. The transformation to Maria Santos had been Elena's own idea, developed during months of debriefing sessions with intelligence officers who were struggling to find a solution that would keep her alive while protecting the classified nature of her final mission. The idea of hiding in plain sight, using the very skills that had made her valuable to the Navy to create an unassailable cover identity, had appealed to Elena's strategic mindset while offering the possibility of a life that was, if not normal, at least peaceful. For 7 years, the strategy had worked perfectly. Maria Santos was accepted as exactly what she appeared to be, a former city dweller who had found contentment in the simple rhythms of island life and maritime commerce. Her past was interesting enough to satisfy casual curiosity. Inheriting money from a mysterious aunt provided explanation for both her presence on the island and her financial resources, while being vague enough to discourage detailed investigation. But Elena had always known that her peaceful retirement was essentially borrowed time. The strategic importance of the Caribbean shipping lanes, the ongoing geopolitical tensions between major powers, and the simple fact that secrets have a way of surfacing meant that eventually someone would find her. She had planned for this possibility, maintaining capabilities and resources that would allow her to respond to threats while protecting her carefully constructed new life. The early warning signs had been subtle, the kind of anomalies that would have been invisible to anyone without Elena's training and experience. Unusual air traffic patterns over the past month, with aircraft following routes that suggested surveillance rather than normal transportation. Changes in shipping traffic that indicated possible military movements disguised as commercial activities. Radio chatter in frequencies and encryption protocols that brought back memories of her active service days. Elena had been monitoring these developments with growing concern, using her position at the marina to gather intelligence while maintaining the appearance of normal business activities. The increased activity suggested that someone was planning operations in her area, though the purpose and scope remained unclear. Her greatest fear was that her cover had been compromised, and that the activity was directed at locating and neutralizing the former Captain Elena Vasquez. But as she stood on the dock in the early morning light, checking weather conditions for another day of fishing charters, Elena could not have imagined that within hours, her carefully maintained anonymity would be shattered by an event that would force her to choose between preserving her peaceful new life and confronting the greatest threat the Caribbean had seen in decades. The radio chatter that morning included references to naval exercises being conducted by an unnamed foreign power, though the details were vague and the source unclear. Elena filed the information away as potentially significant, but not immediately threatening. Military exercises in international waters were common enough, and the Caribbean's strategic importance made it a regular location for naval activities by various nations. But exercises involving 25 warships were not routine, and as Elena would soon discover, the vessels approaching her quiet corner of the Caribbean were not conducting training operations. They were an invasion fleet, and their destination was the cluster of strategically important islands that included her carefully chosen refuge of Isla Perdida. The woman who had spent 7 years hiding from her past was about to confront a future that would require every skill she had learned as Captain Elena Vasquez, and more than a few she had developed as Maria Santos. The peaceful charter captain was about to discover that sometimes the only way to protect the life you've built is to risk everything you've become. The first indication that Maria's world was about to collapse came at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, when her encrypted monitoring equipment detected a transmission pattern she hadn't heard in 7 years. The signal lasted only 12 seconds, buried in what appeared to be routine commercial shipping traffic, but the encryption protocol was one used exclusively by naval special operations units during active combat deployment. Elena's hands stopped moving over the engine compartment, where she'd been conducting her daily maintenance check, her trained ear immediately recognizing the distinctive cadence of military emergency communications. She climbed out of the engine bay with deliberate calm, wiping her hands on a shop rag while her mind raced through threat assessment protocols. The transmission had been brief enough to avoid detection by standard monitoring equipment, but her specialized receivers had captured enough data to confirm what she'd hoped never to hear again. Someone was coordinating naval movements in her operational area using protocols that suggested hostile intent rather than routine exercises. Maria walked into her office with the unhurried pace of someone checking weather reports for the day's charter, but her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the concealed keyboard that accessed her real communication systems. The decoded transmission data painted a picture that made her blood run cold. Multiple naval units were converging on coordinates that would bring them directly through the shipping lanes surrounding Isla Perdida, moving with the kind of precision that indicated months of planning and intelligence gathering. The morning's first charter customers weren't due to arrive for another 2 hours, giving Elena time to conduct a more thorough analysis of the developing situation. She activated her long-range surveillance equipment, disguised as a weather monitoring station that she claimed helped her predict fishing conditions for customers. The sophisticated array of sensors and receivers began painting a detailed picture of naval activity across a 100-mile radius, revealing patterns that confirmed her worst fears. 25 vessels were approaching from 3 different directions, their formation suggesting a coordinated operation rather than coincidental traffic. The ships were maintaining radio silence except for the brief encrypted bursts that had triggered her detection systems, but their movement patterns were unmistakably military. More troubling still, their projected courses would converge in approximately 18 hours, at a position that would effectively surround the cluster of small islands that included her sanctuary. Elena recognized the tactical formation from her own operational planning experience. It was designed for territorial seizure rather than naval combat, with the ships positioned to establish a blockade that could control all sea traffic while providing fire support for amphibious operations. The attacking force was planning to occupy her section of the Caribbean, and based on the size and composition of the fleet, they intended to hold it permanently. The identity of the attacking force remained unclear from the limited intelligence she'd gathered, but certain characteristics of their communication protocols and movement patterns suggested state-level military capability rather than irregular forces or criminal organizations. This was a professional naval operation conducted by personnel with advanced training and sophisticated equipment, making it far more dangerous than the regional conflicts and criminal activities that occasionally disrupted Caribbean peace. Elena's first instinct was to evacuate immediately, using the emergency protocols she'd established for exactly this scenario. The Isabella carried enough fuel and supplies to reach friendly territory before the attacking fleet could establish effective control of the sea lanes, and her false identity documents would allow her to disappear into the chaos that such a large-scale military operation would inevitably create. Within 6 hours, Maria Santos could vanish as completely as Elena Vasquez had 7 years earlier. But as she plotted escape routes and calculated timing windows, Elena found herself confronting a moral dilemma she hadn't anticipated. The 73 residents of Isla Perdida had no idea what was approaching their peaceful community. They lacked the intelligence-gathering capabilities to detect the threat, the military experience to understand its implications, and the resources to mount any kind of effective defense or evacuation. If Elena simply disappeared, she would be condemning innocent people to whatever fate the attacking force had planned for occupied territory. The strategic value of the island cluster that included Isla Perdida was obvious to anyone with naval planning experience. The islands commanded key shipping lanes used by commercial traffic traveling between North and South America, while providing natural harbors that could support forward naval bases for operations throughout the Caribbean. Control of this area would allow a hostile power to disrupt Allied shipping while projecting military force across a region that multiple democratic nations considered vital to their economic and security interests. Elena walked out onto the marina dock, ostensibly checking mooring lines while actually conducting visual surveillance of the horizon. The morning was clear with excellent visibility, but the attacking fleet was still beyond visual range of surface observers. Only her specialized equipment had detected their approach, giving her advance warning that could prove crucial if she decided to take action rather than simply flee. The weight of command decisions that she'd thought were permanently behind her settled back onto Elena's shoulders with familiar heaviness. During her active service, she had faced situations where the choices available were all bad. Where protecting some people meant accepting that others would be hurt. Where tactical necessities conflicted with personal loyalties. But civilian life had allowed her to avoid such decisions, to focus on simple problems with clear solutions rather than the complex moral calculations that military command required. As she stood on the dock watching fishing boats prepare for another routine day, Elena realized that her 7 years of hiding had been preparation for this moment rather than escape from it. The skills she'd maintained, the equipment she'd acquired, the intelligence networks she'd carefully preserved, all of it had been unconscious preparation for a threat that her strategic mind had known would eventually materialize. She hadn't been retiring from naval service. She'd been positioning herself to serve in a different capacity when the need arose. The approaching fleet represented exactly the kind of threat that the experimental programs Elena had participated in were designed to counter. Conventional naval forces would be overwhelmed by 25 attacking ships, while diplomatic and political responses would come too late to prevent occupation of strategic territory. The situation required someone willing to operate outside normal military channels, using unconventional tactics and experimental technologies to achieve objectives that traditional forces couldn't accomplish. Elena returned to her office and activated communication protocols she hadn't used since her official naval career ended. The encrypted channels required multiple authentication steps and connected to networks that officially didn't exist, but her access codes were still valid after 7 years of dormancy. Within minutes, she was in contact with intelligence analysts who had been monitoring developing threats to Caribbean stability, but lacked assets in position to gather detailed information about the approaching fleet. The conversation was conducted in the careful language of deniable operations, where nothing was stated directly, but everything was understood by people trained in such communications. Elena provided precise coordinates and timing estimates for the attacking fleet, while receiving confirmation that no friendly forces were positioned to respond to the threat within the critical time window. The approaching invasion would succeed unless someone with local knowledge and unconventional capabilities took action to disrupt it. Elena's former commanding officer, Admiral Patricia Chen, was now serving in a Pentagon position that gave her oversight responsibility for Caribbean security threats. The encrypted communication from Elena was the first detailed intelligence she'd received about the approaching crisis, but it came from a source that officially didn't exist, reporting on operations that couldn't be acknowledged. Chen found herself facing the same impossible choices that had ended Elena's official career 7 years earlier. Military doctrine called for overwhelming force to repel naval invasions, but deploying such force would require political authorization that would take days to obtain and might provoke the broader conflict that all parties were trying to avoid. Diplomatic solutions required identifying the attacking force and understanding their objectives, but intelligence agencies had been caught completely off guard by an operation that must have been planned for months without detection. Conventional responses were inadequate for the speed and scope of the developing crisis. But Admiral Chen remembered Elena's capabilities and the experimental technologies that had made the USS Phantom one of the most effective naval assets ever deployed. The destroyer had been designed for exactly this kind of situation: lone operations against superior forces using advanced stealth technology and unconventional tactics. The ship had been decommissioned after Elena's final mission, its advanced systems deemed too dangerous for normal naval operations. But the technologies it had pioneered were still classified beyond any level of official acknowledgement. Elena's communication included a request that Admiral Chen initially dismissed as impossible, but gradually recognized as the only viable option for responding to the crisis. Elena wasn't asking for official support or authorization for her actions. She was requesting access to equipment and information that would allow her to conduct an independent operation against the attacking fleet, using resources that would be completely deniable if the mission failed, while potentially saving the Caribbean from occupation if it succeeded. The conversation lasted exactly 18 minutes, conducted through relay systems that would prevent anyone from tracing the communication back to its participants. When it ended, Elena had authorization to access a weapons cache hidden on a supposedly uninhabited island 40 miles from her current position, along with detailed intelligence about the approaching fleet that confirmed her worst fears about their intentions and capabilities. The attacking force consisted of ships from 3 different naval services, indicating a coordinated international effort rather than action by a single hostile nation. The lead elements included guided missile destroyers with advanced air defense systems, followed by amphibious assault ships carrying troops and equipment for extended occupation operations. Support vessels included electronic warfare platforms designed to disrupt communications and logistics ships capable of sustaining the fleet for months of independent operations. Most troubling was intelligence indicating that the attack was timed to coincide with diplomatic meetings that would prevent effective response by democratic nations. While Allied governments were engaged in negotiations designed to reduce regional tensions, hostile forces were implementing plans that would present those same governments with fait accompli occupation of strategic territory. By the time political leaders realized they'd been manipulated, the attacking fleet would be entrenched in positions that would require major military operations to dislodge. Elena spent the next hour conducting detailed mission planning using skills she'd hoped never to use again. The tactical situation was challenging, but not impossible for someone with her training and access to appropriate resources. The attacking fleet's greatest strength, its size and coordination, was also a vulnerability that could be exploited by a single operator, willing to take enormous risks for the chance of preventing a strategic disaster. The plan that emerged from Elena's analysis was audacious to the point of appearing suicidal, but it was based on proven tactics and technologies that she had used successfully during her active service. The mission would require her to abandon the safety of her cover identity permanently, exposing herself to detection and retaliation by enemies who had spent 7 years searching for her. But it also offered the possibility of preventing an international crisis while protecting the innocent people who had unknowingly provided her with sanctuary for 7 years. Elena's first step was informing her charter customers that boat problems would prevent their scheduled fishing trip, apologizing profusely, while secretly relieving that she wouldn't have civilians aboard during what was about to become a combat zone. She used mechanical issues as explanation for canceling all bookings for the next week, giving her operational freedom while maintaining her cover story for as long as possible. The weapons cache that Admiral Chin had given her access to was located on what appeared to be a barren rock formation called Skeleton Key, uninhabited and unremarkable except for the sophisticated camouflage that concealed military equipment worth more than most small nations' entire defense budgets. The supplies had been positioned there during Elena's active service as part of contingency planning for exactly the kind of crisis that was now developing. Elena modified the Isabella's course to appear like a routine supply run to neighboring islands, using established fishing patterns to conceal her actual destination. The boat's enhanced navigation systems allowed her to locate the hidden cache despite camouflage that would have fooled satellite surveillance, while her authentication codes opened security systems that had been waiting 7 years for her return. The equipment Elena retrieved from Skeleton Key transformed the Isabella from a fishing charter boat into a stealth naval asset capable of operations against targets that conventional forces couldn't touch. Advanced sensors replaced her standard fish-finding sonar, providing target acquisition capabilities that military commanders would have envied. Defensive systems included electronic warfare equipment that could disrupt enemy communications and navigation, while offensive capabilities remained carefully concealed beneath fishing gear and recreational equipment. Most importantly, Elena recovered the advanced communication systems that would allow her to coordinate with intelligence networks and friendly forces without revealing her position or identity. The equipment was compact enough to integrate with the Isabella's existing systems, while providing capabilities that would allow her to function as an intelligence gathering and disruption asset against the approaching fleet. As Elena completed her preparations, she found herself confronting the psychological challenge of resuming her identity as a naval officer after 7 years of civilian life. The analytical mindset and tactical instincts came back immediately, muscle memory from years of training and combat experience, but the emotional weight of command responsibility felt heavier than she remembered. She was no longer the young captain who had accepted dangerous missions as part of military duty. She was a woman who had found peace and was choosing to sacrifice it for people who didn't even know they needed protection. The transformation from Maria Santos back to Elena Vasquez was completed as the sun reached its zenith, marking the beginning of the most dangerous 18 hours of what had already been an eventful military career. Elena's last act as the charter boat captain was to record a message for the residents of Isla Perdida, explaining that she had been called away on family business but would return as soon as possible. The message would be delivered automatically if she failed to return within 72 hours, providing some explanation for her disappearance while protecting her true identity even in death. Elena's first objective was gathering detailed intelligence about the attacking fleet's composition, capabilities, and intentions. The specialized sensors now concealed aboard the Isabella could provide information that intelligence agencies needed to understand the full scope of the threat, while her position near the convergence point gave her unique opportunities to observe enemy operations firsthand. The Isabella departed Isla Perdida at 14:30 local time, ostensibly bound for a multi-day fishing expedition in waters known for their deep-sea species. Elena's course took her directly toward the approaching fleet, using fishing activity as cover for what was actually a reconnaissance mission against superior enemy forces. She was gambling that her small civilian vessel would be ignored by ships focused on larger strategic objectives, allowing her to gather intelligence while remaining undetected. As the afternoon progressed, Elena's sensors began detecting the electronic signatures of the approaching fleet with increasing clarity. The ships were maintaining strict radio discipline, but their radar and navigation systems provided distinctive signatures that allowed her to identify specific vessel types and estimate their capabilities. The intelligence picture that emerged confirmed that this was a professional military operation conducted by personnel with access to state-of-the-art naval technology. Elena's analysis revealed that the attacking fleet included advanced electronic warfare capabilities that could disrupt civilian and military communications across the entire Caribbean region. Once the operation began, democratic governments would find themselves unable to coordinate response efforts, while commercial shipping would be paralyzed by the loss of navigation and communication systems. The attacking force had planned for every contingency except the possibility that a single operator with experimental technology might attempt to disrupt their carefully orchestrated operation. The first visual contact with enemy vessels came at 1720, as Elena's enhanced optics detected the distinctive silhouette of a guided missile destroyer on the horizon. The ship was maintaining a patrol pattern that suggested it was providing early warning coverage for the main fleet, positioned to detect and intercept any attempts at reconnaissance or interference. Elena adjusted her course to remain outside the destroyer's effective sensor range while continuing to gather intelligence about the approaching threat. As more enemy ships became visible, Elena found herself facing a tactical situation that required her to balance intelligence gathering against the risk of detection. The attacking fleet was larger and more sophisticated than initial reports had indicated, including vessels with capabilities that could threaten not just regional stability, but global shipping routes that democratic nations depended on for economic survival. The stakes of her mission were higher than she'd initially calculated, making success more critical but also more difficult to achieve. Elena's communication with Admiral Chen's intelligence network provided confirmation that no friendly military forces were positioned to respond to the developing crisis within the critical time window. Diplomatic efforts to address the situation through normal channels would take days to organize, while the attacking fleet would complete its occupation of strategic territory within hours. Elena's unofficial mission was the only immediate option for preventing what could become a major international crisis. The weight of responsibility that Elena felt as she maneuvered the Isabella closer to the enemy fleet was unlike anything she'd experienced during her official naval career. When she'd commanded the USS Phantom, she'd been part of a larger military structure, with clear chains of command and established protocols for support and backup. Now she was operating entirely alone, making decisions that could affect the security of multiple nations while having no official status or authority to justify her actions. But Elena also felt a clarity of purpose that had been missing from her civilian life as Maria Santos. The skills and knowledge that had made her an effective naval officer were being used for their intended purpose, protecting innocent people from hostile forces that threatened their freedom and security. The 7 years of hiding hadn't been wasted time. They'd been preparation for a mission that required someone with her unique combination of naval expertise and operational independence. As evening approached and the enemy fleet continued its convergence on the island cluster that included Elena's sanctuary, she began implementing the tactical plan that she'd developed during her mission planning phase. The operation would require her to exploit vulnerabilities in the enemy's formation, while using experimental technologies to achieve effects far beyond what her limited resources should have been capable of producing. Elena's transformation from hiding civilian back to active naval officer was complete as she prepared for combat operations against an enemy fleet that outnumbered her 25-1. The charter boat captain who had spent 7 years fixing engines and teaching tourists to fish was gone, replaced by the tactical commander who had once successfully penetrated enemy defenses that conventional forces couldn't breach. Captain Elena Vasquez was back in action, and the approaching enemy fleet was about to discover why she'd been considered one of the Navy's most dangerous assets. The first shot fired in anger came at 2200 hours when Elena's electronic warfare systems detected an encrypted communication burst that made her stomach drop with recognition. The transmission wasn't from the approaching invasion fleet. It was from a sleek yacht that had been anchored near Isla Perdida for 3 days, masquerading as wealthy tourists enjoying the Caribbean sunshine. Elena's enhanced sensors revealed that the yacht carried military-grade communication equipment and personnel, whose movement patterns suggested special operations training rather than vacation leisure. Elena realized with crystalline clarity that her cover hadn't just been blown, it had been deliberately compromised as part of the invasion operation. Someone with intimate knowledge of her true identity had informed the enemy fleet that Captain Elena Vasquez was hiding on Isla Perdida under the identity of Maria Santos. The approaching naval force wasn't just planning to occupy strategic territory. They were specifically targeting her. using an entire invasion fleet to eliminate the one person who might be capable of disrupting their operation. The yacht's crew began moving with purposeful efficiency, abandoning any pretense of civilian activity as they prepared weapons and communication equipment for what was clearly an assassination mission. Elena counted 8 personnel aboard the vessel, all moving with the coordinated precision of operators who had worked together extensively. Their equipment included not just standard small arms but sophisticated electronic warfare systems, designed to track and disable the kind of stealth technology that had made Elena's previous operation successful. Elena's mind raced through the implications of this revelation as she watched the assassination team prepare for their mission. The enemy hadn't just stumbled across her location through routine intelligence gathering. They'd known exactly where to find her, suggesting a security breach at the highest levels of the intelligence networks she'd trusted with her safety. Someone with access to her deepest secrets had betrayed her location to hostile forces, turning her carefully chosen sanctuary into a trap that had been years in the making. The tactical situation had shifted from challenging to nearly impossible. Elena was now facing not just 25 warships conducting a strategic invasion, but also a specialized assassination team specifically trained and equipped to neutralize her capabilities. Worse still, the presence of the assassination team suggested that enemy intelligence services had detailed knowledge of her abilities and the experimental technology she had access to, meaning they'd planned countermeasures for the tactics she was most likely to employ. Elena activated her most secure communication protocols, reaching out to Admiral Chen through channels that required multiple authentication steps and encryption algorithms that theoretically couldn't be broken even by state-level intelligence services. The response came back within minutes, but it contained information that made Elena's situation even more desperate than she'd realized. Admiral Chen's intelligence network had discovered that the invasion fleet was operating under a false flag operation designed to be blamed on a third party once the occupation was complete. The attacking ships carried no national markings, and their communication protocols were designed to implicate a regional power that democratic nations had been seeking to isolate diplomatically. Once the strategic islands were occupied, the real perpetrators would withdraw, while their proxy took responsibility for what appeared to be an act of regional aggression. But the most disturbing intelligence concerned the source of the security breach that had exposed Elena's location. Preliminary investigation suggested that the leak had come from within the Pentagon's most classified intelligence division, indicating a level of penetration by hostile intelligence services that threatened the security of numerous covert operations worldwide. Elena wasn't just facing an immediate tactical threat. She was confronting evidence of systematic betrayal that reached into the highest levels of American naval intelligence. The implications cascaded through Elena's strategic analysis, like dominoes falling in predetermined patterns. If enemy intelligence services had access to Pentagon-classified systems, they would know about the weapons cache at Skeleton Key, the communication protocols she was using, and potentially even the tactical plans she developed for disrupting their invasion fleet. Every advantage she thought she possessed might actually be known to the enemy, turning her mission from difficult to potentially suicidal. Elena made the hardest decision of her military career as she watched the assassination team complete their preparations aboard the disguised yacht. Instead of attempting to evade or outrun the threats converging on her position, she chose to turn the enemy's knowledge against them by doing exactly what they expected, but doing it better than they'd calculated she could. The Isabella's enhanced stealth systems engaged with a barely audible hum as Elena began her approach toward the assassination team's yacht. The technology was an evolution of systems that had made the USS Phantom nearly invisible to conventional sensors, adapted for use on a much smaller vessel, but retaining the core capabilities that had made Elena's previous operations successful. To enemy radar systems, the Isabella would appear to be nothing more than an unusually dense patch of seawater moving at speeds that conventional physics suggested were impossible. Elena's first objective was neutralizing the assassination team before they could coordinate with the approaching invasion fleet. The specialists aboard the yacht represented the enemy's most detailed intelligence about her capabilities and operational patterns, making them both an immediate threat and a valuable source of information about the broader conspiracy she was facing. But engaging them would require her to reveal capabilities she'd hoped to keep hidden until the climactic confrontation with the main fleet. The attack began at 23:15, with Elena launching a coordinated electronic warfare assault that disabled the yacht's communication systems while blinding their defensive sensors. The Isabella's advanced systems could generate electromagnetic interference patterns that appeared to be natural atmospheric phenomena, making the attack invisible to observers while leaving the target vessel isolated and vulnerable. Elena followed the electronic attack with a kinetic assault using weapons that officially didn't exist. The Isabella's fishing equipment concealed launch systems for projectiles that combined conventional explosives with electromagnetic pulse generators, creating weapons that could disable sophisticated electronic systems while causing physical damage that appeared consistent with conventional ordnance. The assassination team found themselves facing capabilities they'd been told were theoretically possible but had never seen deployed in actual combat. The engagement lasted exactly 7 minutes, ending when the yacht's crew abandoned their vessel and attempted to escape using a high-speed inflatable boat that Elena's sensors tracked effortlessly through the darkness. She allowed them to flee rather than pursuing them to destruction, calculating that their survival would provide valuable intelligence to enemy commanders, while also serving as evidence that the mysterious attacker possessed capabilities far beyond what conventional analysis suggested. Elena boarded the abandoned yacht to gather intelligence about the broader operation she was facing, finding evidence that confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. The vessel's communication logs revealed coordination with intelligence networks spanning multiple continents, while operational plans indicated that the Caribbean invasion was part of a larger strategy designed to destabilize democratic governments throughout the Western Hemisphere. Most troubling was evidence suggesting that the assassination team had been provided with detailed blueprints of Elena's stealth technology, including specifications that were supposed to be known only to a handful of engineers who had worked on the USS Phantom project. The security breach wasn't limited to Elena's location and identity. It extended to the most classified technological secrets that had made her previous operations possible. Elena's analysis of the captured intelligence revealed that enemy forces had been planning the current operation for more than 2 years, systematically gathering information about Caribbean shipping patterns, regional military capabilities, and political vulnerabilities that could be exploited during a coordinated assault. The invasion fleet approaching her position represented the culmination of extensive preparation designed to achieve strategic objectives while maintaining plausible deniability for the real perpetrators. But the intelligence also revealed vulnerabilities in the enemy's operational plan that Elena could potentially exploit. The invasion fleet's communication protocols were designed around assumptions about the technologies they would face, leaving gaps that someone with access to more advanced systems might be able to penetrate. The fleet's command structure relied on coordination between vessels that had never operated together extensively, creating potential weak points that tactical disruption might amplify into strategic failures. Elena's mission planning had to account for the reality that enemy intelligence services knew far more about her capabilities than she'd initially calculated. But their knowledge was based on the technologies and tactics she'd used during her official naval career, not the enhancements and modifications she'd developed during 7 years of unofficial preparation. The enemy expected to face Captain Elena Vasquez as she'd been 7 years ago, not the evolved operator she'd become through years of independent development. The Isabella departed the scene of the yacht engagement, loaded with captured intelligence that painted a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy Elena was facing. The invasion fleet was operating under the command of Admiral Viktor Kozlov, a naval strategist whose career had been built on developing asymmetric warfare tactics for use against technologically superior opponents. Kozlov's forces had achieved success in previous conflicts by combining conventional military capabilities with sophisticated intelligence operations and strategic deception. Elena's psychological profile of Admiral Kozlov, based on captured intelligence and her own knowledge of his previous operations, revealed a commander who relied heavily on detailed planning and contingency development. Kozlov's strategies typically involved overwhelming preparation, designed to account for every possible variable, making him formidable against conventional opponents, but potentially vulnerable to tactics that fell outside his analytical framework. The invasion fleet's operational timeline called for establishing complete control of the strategic island cluster within 36 hours of initial contact, followed by a rapid construction of defensive positions that would make Allied counteraction prohibitively expensive. Kozlov was gambling that democratic governments would choose negotiation over the military operations that would be required to dislodge his forces from fortified positions, allowing him to consolidate territorial gains before effective opposition could be organized. Elena's disruption of the assassination team had altered Kozlov's operational calculus by revealing that his intelligence about her capabilities was incomplete. The attack on the yacht had demonstrated stealth and weapons technologies that exceeded what his analysts had predicted, forcing him to revise his assessment of the threat she represented. But Kozlov's response was characteristically thorough. Instead of continuing with his original plan, he began implementing contingencies designed to neutralize Elena's advantages through overwhelming force and tactical adaptation. The invasion fleet's formation shifted as Elena monitored their communications through captured encryption keys recovered from the yacht. Kozlov was repositioning his forces to create multiple layers of defense around his primary objectives, while assigning specialized units to hunt for Elena's vessel using sensors and tactics specifically designed to counter stealth technology. The enemy commander had concluded that eliminating Elena was essential to the success of his broader operation. Elena found herself in the surreal position of conducting a single-handed naval campaign against an entire invasion fleet, whose commander considered her elimination a strategic priority. The psychological pressure was unlike anything she'd experienced during her official military career, when she'd operated as part of larger forces with established support networks and clear chains of command. Now she was entirely alone, making decisions that could affect the security of multiple nations while facing an enemy who knew her identity and was specifically planning to kill her. But Elena also felt a strange sense of liberation as she maneuvered the Isabella through the darkness toward her next objective. For 7 years, she'd been forced to suppress her natural instincts and tactical mindset, pretending to be someone she wasn't in order to maintain a cover identity that now lay in ruins. The deception was over, the masks were off, and she was free to be the naval officer she'd trained to become during years of intensive preparation. Elena's next target was the invasion fleet's logistics train, a group of support vessels that Kozlov needed to sustain his forces during extended occupation operations. The ships carried fuel, ammunition, and spare parts that the combat vessels couldn't operate without, making them attractive targets for disruption operations. But they were also heavily defended and positioned within the fleet's protective formation, requiring Elena to penetrate multi-layered defenses to reach them. The approach to the logistics vessels required Elena to navigate through a gauntlet of destroyers and frigates equipped with the most advanced sensor systems that enemy naval technology could provide. Kozlov had positioned his defensive forces in overlapping arcs that should have made stealth penetration impossible, but he'd calculated his defensive arrangements based on conventional stealth technology rather than the experimental systems Elena had access to. Elena's infiltration of the enemy formation began at 0230, with the Isabella running silent through waters that were being swept continuously by active sonar systems. The stealth technology that concealed her vessel from enemy sensors worked by creating a bubble of electromagnetic distortion that made conventional detection methods ineffective. But it required precise navigation and timing to avoid detection by the multiple overlapping sensor networks that Kozlov had deployed. The first logistics vessel Elena targeted was a fuel transport, whose destruction would limit the invasion fleet's operational range while creating a spectacular distraction that might mask her approach to additional targets. The ship was defended by electronic warfare systems designed to detect and disable incoming missiles. But Elena's attack used kinetic penetrators that created no electromagnetic signature until the moment of impact. The fuel transport's destruction created a fireball visible for miles, immediately alerting the entire invasion fleet to Elena's presence within their defensive perimeter. Kozlov's response was swift and professional, with combat vessels converging on the attack site while deploying countermeasures designed to detect and engage stealth threats. But Elena was already moving toward her next target, using the chaos and electromagnetic interference from the burning transport to mask her approach. Elena's second attack targeted an ammunition transport, whose cargo included guided missiles intended for shore bombardment during the invasion's initial phases. The vessel's destruction required more precise targeting to avoid a sympathetic detonation that might damage the Isabella, but the resulting explosion eliminated a significant portion of the fleet's precision strike capability, while creating additional confusion among the defensive forces. Admiral Kozlov's tactical communications, intercepted through Elena's captured encryption systems, revealed a commander who was beginning to understand that he was facing an opponent with capabilities his intelligence assessments had underestimated. The attacks on his logistics vessels had been conducted with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of naval vulnerabilities combined with access to weapons systems that fell outside conventional military categories. Elena's third target was the fleet's electronic warfare command ship, a vessel whose destruction would blind Kozlov's forces to stealth threats, while disrupting the coordination systems that held his formation together. But this attack would require her to penetrate the very heart of the enemy formation, where defensive fire would be concentrated and escape routes limited. The approach to the command ship required Elena to use every stealth capability the Isabella possessed while navigating through a maze of hostile vessels whose crews were now actively hunting for her position. The psychological pressure of conducting precision maneuvers while under direct observation by enemy forces tested Elena's skills and nerves to their absolute limits, but her years of training and combat experience provided the mental framework needed to function effectively under extreme stress. Elena's attack on the electronic warfare command ship succeeded through timing and audacity rather than technological superiority. She approached the target from an angle that conventional tactical doctrine suggested was impossible, using the enemy's own assumptions about stealth capabilities to achieve surprise at point-blank range. The resulting destruction eliminated Kozlov's ability to coordinate his distributed forces while providing Elena with intelligence about the fleet's ultimate objectives. The captured data from the command ship revealed that Kozlov's invasion was scheduled to coordinate with simultaneous operations in the Pacific and Atlantic, suggesting a global strategy designed to overwhelm democratic nations' ability to respond to multiple crises simultaneously. Elena's disruption of the Caribbean component was forcing enemy strategists to revise their timeline for operations worldwide, potentially saving Allied forces from coordinated attacks they weren't prepared to counter. But Elena's success against the logistics and command vessels had also revealed her position to Kozlov's remaining forces, who were now converging on her location with overwhelming firepower. The Isabella's stealth systems were sophisticated but not perfect, and repeated attacks had generated enough electromagnetic signatures for enemy analysts to begin predicting her likely positions and movement patterns. Elena found herself facing the climactic phase of her improvised naval campaign as dawn approached, and Kozlov's forces prepared for a coordinated assault designed to eliminate her once and for all. The enemy commander had sacrificed operational surprise and logistical advantage to focus his remaining forces on destroying the single opponent who threatened his entire strategic operation. The final battle would test every capability Elena had developed during her military career and her 7 years of clandestine preparation. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy who now understood that she represented an existential threat to their carefully planned operation. But Elena also possessed advantages that enemy intelligence hadn't accounted for. Technological capabilities they didn't fully understand, tactical flexibility they couldn't predict, and most importantly, the desperate motivation of someone fighting to protect innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. As the sun began to rise over the Caribbean waters where Elena had found 7 years of peace, Captain Elena Vasquez prepared for the battle that would determine whether democratic nations retained control of strategic sea lanes or whether hostile forces would achieve the territorial gains they needed to project power throughout the Western Hemisphere. The fishing charter captain Maria Santos was gone forever, replaced by the naval officer who represented the last hope for preventing a strategic disaster that could reshape the global balance of power. The final confrontation began at dawn, with Admiral Kozlov's remaining 18 warships forming a hunting circle around Elena's last known position. The enemy commander had abandoned all pretense of stealth or strategic surprise, choosing instead to concentrate overwhelming firepower on eliminating the single operator who had transformed his carefully planned invasion into a tactical nightmare. But Kozlov had made the fundamental error of assuming that conventional naval tactics would be effective against an opponent who had spent 7 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Elena watched the enemy formation through her enhanced sensors, analyzing movement patterns and communication intercepts while formulating a strategy that would either save the Caribbean from occupation or result in her death beneath hundreds of tons of twisted metal and seawater. The Isabella's stealth systems were operating at maximum efficiency, but prolonged exposure to active sensor sweeps was gradually degrading their effectiveness. She estimated perhaps 20 minutes before enemy targeting systems would achieve sufficient resolution to guide weapons to her position. The breakthrough came when Elena's analysis of captured intelligence revealed a fatal flaw in Kozlov's operational planning. The invasion fleet's communication systems were designed around a hierarchical command structure that required constant coordination between vessels to maintain formation integrity and fire control solutions. By systematically targeting the fleet's electronic warfare capabilities, Elena had created a window of vulnerability that could be exploited by someone with intimate knowledge of naval command protocols. Elena activated the Isabella's most sophisticated offensive systems, technologies that had been developed in black-budget programs so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of engineers and strategists. The weapons weren't designed to destroy enemy vessels through conventional explosive force. Instead, they targeted the electronic nervous systems that modern naval operations depended on, creating cascading failures that would leave sophisticated warships helpless despite their intact hulls and crews. The attack began with Elena broadcasting a signal that appeared to be a standard distress call from a civilian vessel, requesting assistance from any nearby ships. The transmission used emergency frequencies that naval vessels were required to monitor, ensuring that every ship in Kozlov's fleet would receive the signal simultaneously. But embedded within the distress call was a data packet containing a virus specifically designed to penetrate military communication networks and spread through interconnected systems like a digital plague. Admiral Kozlov's immediate response was to order his communications officers to analyze the signal for potential threats. But the virus had been designed by some of the most sophisticated cyber warfare specialists in American intelligence. Within minutes of detection, the malicious code had penetrated the fleet's central communication hub and begun propagating through every networked system in the formation. Weapons targeting computers, navigation systems, and damage control networks began experiencing failures that appeared random but followed patterns that Elena's strategic mind had carefully orchestrated. Elena's cyber attack created exactly the tactical opportunity she needed to implement the most audacious phase of her plan. With enemy communication systems compromised and coordination between vessels degraded, she could exploit the confusion to position herself for direct action against Kozlov's flagship. The Admiral's command ship contained not just the fleet's tactical coordination center, but also the senior intelligence officers who possessed detailed knowledge of the broader conspiracy Elena was fighting. The Isabella's approach to Kozlov's flagship required navigating through a formation of warships whose crews were struggling to understand why their sophisticated electronic systems were failing simultaneously. Elena used the chaos to her advantage, timing her movements to coincide with communication blackouts while using the enemy's own confusion as camouflage for her infiltration of their defensive perimeter. Elena's boarding of the enemy flagship represented the culmination of everything she had learned during her military career and 7 years of clandestine preparation. The operation required not just naval tactical skills but also the close-quarters combat expertise and intelligence-gathering capabilities that Special Operations Forces trained for extensively. But Elena had always been more than just a ship's captain. Her classified training had included preparation for exactly the kind of multi-domain operations that the current crisis demanded. The assault on Kozlov's command center lasted 47 minutes and resulted in the capture of intelligence that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy Elena had been fighting. The invasion fleet was indeed part of a coordinated global operation designed to simultaneously challenge democratic nations in multiple theaters while exploiting political divisions that would prevent effective military response. But more importantly, Elena discovered evidence that identified the Pentagon intelligence officer who had betrayed her location and provided enemy forces with classified American naval technologies. Admiral Kozlov himself proved to be a professional naval officer who had been manipulated by intelligence services that provided him with objectives and resources while concealing the true strategic implications of his mission. When confronted with evidence of how his operation fit into a broader pattern of destabilization activities, Kozlov agreed to cooperate with Elena's investigation in exchange for protection from the intelligence networks that had used him as an expendable asset. Elena's interrogation of captured intelligence officers revealed that the conspiracy reached far beyond military operations into the highest levels of international finance and political manipulation. The invasion fleet had been funded through a complex network of shell corporations and cryptocurrency transactions designed to conceal the identity of the ultimate beneficiaries, while political influence operations had been conducted to ensure that democratic governments would be unable to respond effectively to the coordinated crisis. But Elena's greatest discovery came when she accessed the flagship's secure communication logs and found evidence of ongoing coordination with sleeper agents positioned throughout the American military establishment. The conspiracy wasn't limited to foreign intelligence services. It included American traitors who had been systematically compromised through blackmail, bribery, and ideological recruitment over a period of several years. Elena's transmission of the captured intelligence to Admiral Chen triggered a coordinated counterintelligence operation that began rolling up the conspiracy's American components within hours of her initial report. Federal investigators who had been tracking suspicious financial transactions suddenly had names and locations that allowed them to move against compromised officials before they could destroy evidence or flee to hostile nations. The political ramifications of Elena's discoveries extended far beyond the immediate military crisis she had confronted. The evidence she provided documented systematic attempts to destabilize democratic institutions through a combination of military pressure, economic manipulation, and political subversion that represented a new form of warfare designed to achieve strategic objectives without triggering the conventional military responses that traditional aggression would provoke. Elena's personal confrontation with the traitors who had exposed her location came through encrypted video conference with Pentagon officials who were conducting damage assessment of the security breaches she had uncovered. The conversation was brief and professional, but Elena could see in their faces the recognition that their betrayal had nearly resulted in both her death and a strategic disaster that could have reshaped the global balance of power. The aftermath of Elena's operation required careful coordination between multiple intelligence agencies to ensure that the captured evidence could be used effectively while protecting the sources and methods that had made her mission possible. Admiral Chen's team worked with Elena to develop cover stories that would explain the intelligence discoveries without revealing the existence of the experimental technologies or unofficial operations that had actually produced the results. Elena's role in exposing and defeating the conspiracy was classified at levels that ensured her actions would never be officially acknowledged, but the strategic impact of her intervention was recognized at the highest levels of government. The prevention of the Caribbean invasion had disrupted timing for coordinated operations worldwide, allowing democratic nations to reinforce their defenses and coordinate responses that neutralized threats they might not have detected until too late. The captured invasion fleet presented a complex challenge for international law and diplomatic relations, as the vessels carried no national markings and their crews included personnel from multiple countries who claimed to be conducting legitimate military exercises. Elena's intelligence about the true command structure and financing of the operation provided the evidence needed to hold the real perpetrators accountable while avoiding conflicts with nations whose personnel had been manipulated rather than genuinely hostile. Admiral Kozlov's cooperation with American intelligence agencies resulted in the identification and neutralization of similar operations being planned in other strategic regions, potentially preventing conflicts that could have drawn democratic nations into prolonged military engagements at significant cost in lives and resources. The Admiral's detailed knowledge of enemy operational planning proved invaluable for developing countermeasures against future attempts at territorial acquisition through similar tactics. Elena's decision about her future required careful consideration of both personal desires and strategic necessities. Her cover identity as Maria Santos had been permanently compromised, making it impossible for her to return to her peaceful life on Isla Perdida. But her demonstrated capabilities and unique knowledge of enemy tactics made her invaluable for ongoing operations against the conspiracy she had helped expose. The solution proposed by Admiral Chen offered Elena a chance to continue serving while maintaining the operational independence that had made her so effective during the Caribbean crisis. She would function as a deep cover asset with access to experimental technologies and unlimited operational authority, conducting missions that fell outside normal military channels while maintaining complete deniability for the government agencies that supported her work. Elena's acceptance of this new role represented not just a personal decision, but a recognition that the changing nature of international conflict required new approaches to national defense. Traditional military structures were proving inadequate for addressing threats that combined conventional military force with cyber warfare, financial manipulation, and political subversion in coordinated campaigns designed to achieve strategic objectives without triggering established defensive responses. The residents of Isla Perdida eventually learned that their quiet neighbor Maria Santos had been called away on urgent family business and would not be returning to her charter fishing operation. The marina was purchased by a Caribbean development company that maintained the facilities while gradually transforming them into a more conventional tourist destination. The local population never learned how close they had come to living under foreign military occupation. Elena's new identity and operational base were established in a location that provided access to global shipping routes while maintaining the kind of isolation that made covert operations possible. She continued using maritime cover for activities that required her to move undetected through international waters. But her capabilities now included resources that would allow her to respond to threats anywhere in the world within hours of detection. The intelligence networks that Elena had helped protect during her Caribbean operation provided her with ongoing updates about the conspiracy she had fought, tracking the activities of surviving members and watching for signs of renewed coordination. The evidence she had captured continued to yield new leads as analysts developed a comprehensive understanding of how the destabilization campaign had been planned and implemented. Elena's first mission in her new capacity involved tracking financial transactions that suggested another coordinated operation was being planned for the Pacific region. The assignment required her to operate under deep cover in international shipping markets, while gathering intelligence about cargo movements that might indicate military preparations disguised as commercial activities. But Elena's most important ongoing mission involved training other operators in the tactics and technologies that had made her Caribbean intervention successful. The demonstrated effectiveness of experimental stealth systems and cyber warfare capabilities had convinced military planners that similar assets needed to be developed and deployed to counter future threats of the type Elena had faced. Elena's training programs were conducted at facilities that officially didn't exist, teaching carefully selected personnel the combination of naval tactics, intelligence operations, and technological expertise needed for independent operations against sophisticated threats. Her students included both military officers and intelligence specialists who showed the psychological resilience needed for missions that required complete operational autonomy. The psychological impact of Elena's transformation from hiding civilian back to active military operator required ongoing adjustment as she adapted to living without the peaceful certainties that had defined her years as Maria Santos. The constant vigilance and tactical thinking that her new role demanded were familiar from her previous naval career, but the isolation of deep cover operations presented challenges that conventional military service hadn't prepared her for. Elena's relationship with Admiral Chen evolved into something closer to partnership than traditional military hierarchy, as the nature of Elena's missions required her to operate with complete independence while maintaining coordination with official intelligence agencies. Their communication protocols were designed to provide Elena with support and resources while maintaining plausible deniability for her actions. Elena's reflection on her Caribbean operation confirmed that her 7 years of hiding had actually been preparation for the mission that revealed her true calling. The skills she had developed as Maria Santos, understanding local communities, operating independently, maintaining cover under scrutiny, had proven as valuable as her formal military training for conducting the kind of operations that emerging threats required. The legacy of Elena's intervention in the Caribbean extended beyond the immediate strategic victory to influence how democratic nations approached hybrid warfare threats that combined military, economic, and political components. Her tactical innovations and intelligence discoveries were incorporated into training programs and operational doctrine that prepared other operators for similar challenges. Elena's final communication with the residents of Isla Perdida came through a message transmitted on emergency frequencies during a severe hurricane that threatened the island months after her departure. The message provided detailed weather forecasting and evacuation recommendations that helped the community prepare for the storm's impact, suggesting that their former neighbor continued to watch over them despite her official absence. As Elena settled into her new role conducting operations that would never be officially acknowledged, she found satisfaction in knowing that her actions had protected not just the strategic interests of democratic nations, but also the simple peace that ordinary people deserve to enjoy without threat from hostile forces. The charter fishing captain Maria Santos was gone forever, but Captain Elena Vasquez had found a way to continue serving the values that had originally motivated her naval career. The conspiracy that Elena had helped expose continued to generate investigations and counter-operations that would occupy intelligence agencies for years, but her intervention had prevented the immediate crisis that could have led to much broader conflicts. Her success in the Caribbean had demonstrated that individual operators with appropriate training and technology could achieve strategic effects that conventional military forces might not be able to accomplish through official channels. Elena's story became legend within the classified community of operators and intelligence specialists who understood the true nature of modern threats to democratic institutions. Her name was never mentioned in public acknowledgments or official histories, But her tactical innovations and strategic insights influenced a generation of personnel who carried on her mission of protecting freedom through operations that remained forever hidden in the shadows of official secrecy. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.